I'm told by my wife that I really offend people by staring at them, but I just tend to stare and pick up. Well, I'm trying to soak it all up and work out where the shot is, I suppose, and I'm unconscious of it. Oh, the mechanics, the sheer beauty of the cameras, I think, and the chemistry and the physics. I was 9 years old when I found my father's folding Ensign camera, and I was just fiddling with it. And a chap who worked for my father, he owned a nursery, was an amateur photographer, and he brought a roll of film in the next day and loaded it, and I went out and I took pictures. Dad used to have big piles of dirt and stuff, and my brother and sister were jumping off it, and I took pictures of them. And that chap processed it that night and brought back little contact prints, and I was completely hooked. So then he taught me processing almost immediately, how to seesaw a roll of 120 film in a red safe light in those days, and I could see the image come up. So within a week, I learnt to process film. I saw what contact printing was, and so forever after that, I would just stand in camera shop windows, lusting after everything that was in the window, from Leicas to Paxets to whatever was going. And then I would read catalogues. I'd read those lists of lenses and their prices. I mean, a complete nerd, but I knew everything about every camera by the time I was 12 years old. I very quickly learned to grab expressions, and I was shy, so at university I worked as a wedding photographer, but my look was to stand right back with a telephoto lens and knock these amazing moments off. So I didn't direct the bride and groom to stand in a group. I just photographed whatever the wedding did. But it was, and I'm still intrigued. Ironically, I became an architectural photographer where there is no frozen moment. But yeah, I'm still a dab hand at documentary photo. The only thing I was ever confident of as a young photographer was composition. And so I came to the realisation when I became an advertising photographer that the attractive power, the memorable power of a photograph was a strong composition. And the first of those strong compositions is a central line, and the next one is a triangle. And in those particular poster shots of the naked girls leaping over the blokes lying on the sand, it was just the perfect moment to get that triangular leg action, which also implied energy and fun, but I had that central element, and that I then replicated in a lot of sports school work and National Bank and yeah, all the other big campaigns, and I got more and more confident with that, embodying a strong composition within a quickly made grab shot. I went from studying architecture at Melbourne University to being asked, oddly enough, via Rennie Ellis, who's an equally good friend. Rennie worked for Monaghan Damon Adams, for Philip Adams at that stage, and he was introducing me to all the other advertising photographers just out of curiosity. But one of them, Kevin Orpin, who was a partner of Bob Bourne, asked me to come and help out in his advertising studio because he'd brought Peter Goff across from London and he'd promised him an assistant, and of course he hadn't got one, so he knew that I took photos. So I deferred my final year of architecture to go and assist Peter Goff, and that worked pretty well, but Peter didn't really need an assistant at that stage. So the studio knocked up a folio and sent me out to work. And I picked up a lot of fashion work. And so for 20 years, on and off, I was doing major fashion photography, worked in Milan. At the same time was shooting the Marlborough account and a few other big advertising accounts. But I realised there was one of those Melbourne recessions where all my fashion clients went broke because they were the manufacturers and wholesalers. And I then realised that no one really wanted a 12-month-old fashion photo. You know, it had had its season, it was dead and gone. But the little bit of architectural work that I was starting to shoot for my contemporaries from architecture school, I realised was adding to the national estate and would be a valuable historic record. And so I made a commitment in the late 70s to just do architecture. in fashion, I'm the director and the model does what I tell it. In architecture, the building tells me what to do. I have to move around it. It's static, and that's a quite interesting way of approaching it. And that's that with my sense of strong composition started to work. And then historically, it was an era of Max Dupain and Wolfgang Sievers and Mark Strizig and David Moore, and I was seen as the newcomer on the block. And my distinction was that I tended to work in colour, whereas Max hated colour. And I remember Elizabeth Farrelly criticising me, saying, "Oh, John Gollings just does lurid purple skies." And I've sort of been fighting that reputation all my life. I was also a bit of a wide-angle queen because I wanted to describe the building in its context, whereas Dupain and the others cropped into the building and excluded the context. So I was already back in the 70s establishing a look that was quite different to others. The inclusion of the environment and the cultural aspects of an architectural photograph has really only been possible since we went digital, because we're using smaller cameras and faster film, and suddenly we can put people and events in. Previously it was a technical limitation. I was on 4.5, I stopped down to f16, fastest film was 400 ISO. You really weren't comfortable shooting people at all, and so that change is a digital change. There's a major conceptual issue at the moment in architectural photography, but my part of that issue goes back to working with Harry Seidler, and I was shooting a building for him, I think at the Waverley Civic Centre, and I took what I thought was this fantastic shot, and of course we were all on 4.5 and a Polaroid, and I showed Harry this Polaroid of the front entrance, and he absolutely hit the roof, and Harry had a bad temper. He screamed at me and said, "You idiot, you never crop into a building. That building might go on for another 100 yards. He said, "You must show the whole building in every architectural photograph." And I have never, ever forgotten that lesson. I was interested socially in what I call dead cities, because fundamentally it makes you realise that no civilization has ever lived forever. And of course I was very conscious of it with the Trumpian era and basically watching the decline of the era of America. And it will become another Asian era, I believe. So by photographing dead cities, I learnt a fundamental understanding about human nature and power politics. And the fact, Angkor Wat, for instance, died because of climate change. They ran out of water, and other cities have been taken over. They've died for a million known reasons. But the other reason for shooting it is that a dead city is stripped of all its modern paraphernalia and colour, and so you're left with a primary form, and it was a great exercise to learn to make a strong image of a building that tended to disappear. So in India, the colour of the basalt stone in black and white was the same density as the sky, so you had to work really hard. You either had to go back to blue sensitive film, and I shot with 47B filters to get a white sky. It really made me think how to bring out those formal qualities, and most of that work was black and white. So yes, I learned a lot technically, and I learned how to really hone in on the structure of a building, which I then brought back and applied to the modern architecture. Rendering, creating a building out of nothing, a CAD version, is also fascinating. I've been asked to shoot the final versions of some of the renders that my rendering company did, and I can't match them because they're just so perfect. And it caused me a big problem the other day with a major developer who gave me a list of, I think, 20 of his buildings. He wanted to reshoot a new folio, and I just couldn't match the renders that he'd had done. And I just had to go back to him and say, "Look, you've got the best images, forget the reality." So I'm struggling with reality compared to the possibilities of certainly CAD.
That's good, isn't it? Yeah.
As an architectural photographer, I am concerned about the direction of architectural photography. I've cover the idea that it's currently fashionable to crop into the building. Sometimes they're beautiful, artful little shots, but they're decorator photos. I really am concerned to show the whole building and the structure and the form of it in context, and that's so I take a pretty clean photograph. I'm not averse to a lot of retouching. I might take out a chimney pot or something, and an exit sign, and I'll dodge and burn and everything I was taught years ago to do. But basically it's a very straight, literal record, and I think architectural photography has a particular requirement.